I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone's business, where kids grow up side by side in school from kindergarten to senior year, and where reputations are made before you're even old enough to define yourself. From as far back as I can remember, I knew we didn't have much. My father worked at a factory that paid just enough to keep food on the table, and my mother cleaned houses for the families who had more. She used to come home with sore hands and a tired smile, pretending like the endless scrubbing and vacuuming didn't wear her down. We lived paycheck to paycheck, and there were nights when dinner was nothing more than macaroni with ketchup because that's what we had. Still, I wasn't ashamed. I wore my thrift store clothes with pride, patched up shoes when they broke, and told myself it didn't matter what people thought of me. But when you're a teenager in America, it does matter. High school has a cruel way of magnifying what you don't have. My best friends, or at least the girls I thought were my best friends, were Rebecca, Tiffany, and Laura. They came from families with big houses, 2 cars, and summer vacations. They wore new clothes each season, carried Coach purses in high school, and got their nails done every week. And me? I was the one standing slightly behind them in group pictures, hoping nobody noticed my jeans were from Goodwill. For a while, it didn't bother me. I told myself friendship wasn't about money. They invited me to sleepovers. I laughed at their jokes, and I thought we were equals. But deep down, I always knew they saw me differently. I wasn't one of them. I was the girl they kept around to feel better about themselves. The moment that burned itself into my memory happened on a cold November afternoon. We were walking downtown after school, just wandering, when we passed by the boutique on Main Street. It was the kind of store my mom and I would never step into. The kind of store where the smell of perfume and polished wood would remind you didn't belong there. In the window I saw it. A dress. Not just any dress. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Midnight blue, silk that shimmered under the display lights, with delicate lace along the sleeves. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't loud. It was elegant in a way that made me dream of another life, a life where I could walk into that store, point at the dress and say, "I'll take it." I didn't even realize I had stopped walking until Rebecca's voice cut through my daydream. "Don't tell me you like that dress," she said, smirking. The other 2 turned, and Tiffany laughed. "That's like, what? A $600 dress? Maybe more." "Honey, you'd need to work for a year just to afford half of it," Laura added. "Honestly, it would look wasted on you. That's a dress for someone who goes to charity galas, not whatever dances our school throws." They laughed. Not cruelly, but in that dismissive way rich girls laugh at something beneath them. I forced a smile, even though my chest was burning. "Yeah, I know. I was just looking," I said softly. But inside, I made a silent promise. One day, I'll wear that kind of dress. One day, I won't just be the poor girl standing outside the window. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling of my tiny room. I thought about the laughter, the smirks, the way their voices dripped with pity disguised as humor. Something inside me hardened. It wasn't about the dress itself anymore. It was about what it represented. Dignity, respect, freedom from being looked down on. From that day forward, every insult, every sideways glance, every reminder that I was less than became fuel. I worked harder in school. I picked up a part-time job at the local diner, saving every dollar I could. I skipped going out with them to movies or restaurants because I couldn't afford it anyway. And honestly, I didn't want to sit there pretending while they whispered about me behind my back. Slowly, the distance grew. They went shopping at the mall without me, posting pictures online of their new outfits. I told myself I didn't care, but the truth is, I cared more than I wanted to admit. Loneliness can sting worse than poverty. Still, Every time I walked past that boutique window, I stopped. The dress stayed there for months, until one day it was gone, sold to someone who could afford it. But the image of it stayed with me, like a silent reminder of the promise I had made to myself. By senior year, we weren't really friends anymore. Rebecca and Tiffany went to cheer practice, Laura started dating the quarterback, and I focused on grades and work. I got accepted into a state university, though I knew paying for it would be a battle. My mom cried tears of pride, and my dad promised me he'd help with what little he could. When graduation came, the three of them strutted across the stage in designer heels, tossing their caps with perfect nails and hair. I walked in the same cap and gown as everyone else, but inside, I felt different, stronger, hungrier. I wasn't the girl staring through the glass anymore. I was the girl building her way out. And little did I know, the real test, the one that would decide who I became, was only beginning. After graduation, summer came and went. Most of the girls I once called my friends spent their days at the lake, posting pictures with drinks in hand, sun-kissed smiles, and captions like, "Best summer ever." Me? I spent mine wearing a faded diner uniform, taking orders from customers who barely looked me in the eye, and leaving work each night smelling like grease and coffee. I hated the smell, but I loved the paycheck. Every crumpled dollar bill I stuffed into a jar under my bed was another step toward the life I dreamed of. Sometimes, when the diner was slow, I'd look out the window at the girls who used to be my friends, walking by in designer shorts and sandals. They'd glance at me, wave half-heartedly, and keep walking. A part of me wanted to run outside, to remind them I still existed. But another part of me, the stronger part, whispered, "Let them go. You're building something bigger." When August rolled around, it was time to pack for college. I didn't have matching luggage sets like the other girls. I had 2 hand-me-down suitcases with frayed handles and a box of books. My dad loaded them into the back of our old pickup truck, and my mom fussed over me like I was moving across the world, not just 2 hours away. "Work hard, baby," she said, squeezing my shoulders. "Don't let anybody make you feel small. You've got just as much right to be there as anybody else." I nodded, but her words didn't erase the knot in my stomach. I knew what I was walking into. A campus filled with kids from families like Rebecca's and Tiffany's. Wealthy, polished, confident. I was the outlier. Again. My first week at university was a blur of classes, new faces, and quiet humiliation. I couldn't afford the meal plan, so I packed peanut butter sandwiches in my bag while the girls in my dorm ordered takeout without thinking twice. They had cars. I walked. They had laptops with glowing Apple logos. I borrowed one from the library. But what hurt the most wasn't what I lacked. It was the way they looked at me. Like I was a charity case. Like they were waiting for me to drop out and disappear. One night, a group of girls invited me to join them for a night out. I thought maybe, just maybe, I'd found new friends. But when I opened my closet, panic set in. I had nothing to wear. Just old jeans, faded shirts, and one thrift store dress that didn't quite fit. I almost said no. Almost curled up in bed and let the loneliness swallow me. But then I remembered that blue dress in the boutique window. I remembered the laughter. And I told myself, go. Show up. Even if you're not perfect, show up. So I put on the thrift store dress, pinned it in the back with a safety pin, and walked into the bar with my head held high. The girls ordered cocktails that cost more than my groceries for a week. I nursed a single soda. They laughed loudly, took selfies, and danced. I smiled, pretended I wasn't out of place, but when one of them leaned over and whispered, "Cute dress. Is it vintage?" I knew exactly what she meant. It wasn't a compliment. It was a reminder. And that night, when I walked back to my dorm alone, my shoes rubbing blisters into my feet, I promised myself again, One day, they won't be able to laugh. One day, I'll walk into a room and no one will dare to look down on me. Life at college didn't get easier. I worked 2 part-time jobs, diner shifts on weekends, tutoring during the week. I studied late at night, drinking coffee until my hands shook. There were moments I wanted to quit, moments when exhaustion broke me down and I cried quietly into my pillow so my roommate wouldn't hear. But the lowest point came sophomore year. I was walking across campus when I heard my name. Rebecca. Yes, that Rebecca. She was visiting her boyfriend, who happened to go to my university. She spotted me and called out like we were old friends. "Wow," she said, giving me a once-over. "You're still here? I mean, that's impressive. I thought you'd go to community college or something." Her words stung more than I wanted to admit. I forced a laugh, pretending it didn't bother me, but as soon as she walked away, tears burned my eyes. That night, I skipped dinner and buried myself in work. I wasn't just poor anymore. I was invisible, forgettable, and that's when something inside me snapped. No more feeling sorry for yourself. No more waiting for them to see your worth. Prove it. To them, to yourself, to the whole damn world. The next semester, I applied for an internship at a local marketing firm. Dozens of students applied, many of them richer, more polished, more connected. I almost didn't bother. But I remembered the promise I made. To myself. To that girl staring at the dress in the window. When I walked into the interview, I wore the only blazer I owned, borrowed from a thrift store, with sleeves too long and buttons loose. My hands shook, but my voice didn't. I spoke about my work ethic, my grades, the hours I spent juggling jobs and classes. I spoke with a fire I didn't know I had. A week later, I got the call. I was hired. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't high-paying, but it was a step. My step. And for the first time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was inching closer to the life I'd dreamed of. But here's the thing about revenge stories. They don't happen overnight. They take years, decades sometimes. And though I didn't know it then, my story was only beginning. Because one day, years later, I'd see those same girls again, and the look on their faces when I walked past them in that dress, that would be worth every sleepless night. Nobody tells you how heavy success feels when you're carrying it alone. Every step forward cost me something: sleep, love, friends. But what kept me going wasn't ambition. It was that promise, that dress, and the laughter I could still hear echoing in the back of my mind. After graduation, while my classmates were posting pictures in Paris or moving into apartments their parents paid for, I was dragging my 2 suitcases back into the same old pickup truck. My parents hugged me like I'd already made it, like I was some kind of hero. But deep down, I felt like a fraud. Yes, I had a degree. Yes, I'd worked harder than anyone I knew, but a degree didn't pay bills. A degree didn't erase debt. And it sure didn't guarantee that the world would take me seriously. I got my first full-time job at a small marketing firm downtown. It paid barely enough to cover rent for a tiny studio apartment and student loans, but it was something. The office had peeling paint on the walls and computers that froze every other hour, but when I sat at that desk, I felt like I was standing at the starting line of something bigger. Of course, reality hit fast. The first month, my boss asked me to organize files and fetch coffee more than he asked me to contribute ideas. I bit my tongue, reminding myself that everyone starts at the bottom. But at night, sitting alone in my apartment, I cried into takeout containers, wondering if I'd made a mistake. And yet, every morning I woke up, put on the same 2 work outfits on rotation, and pushed forward. The truth? I was lonely. Most of my college friends moved on with their lives, scattering across the country. I'd scroll through social media and see them smiling at rooftop parties, holding champagne glasses, wearing clothes that made them look like they belonged in glossy magazines. Meanwhile, I was eating instant noodles at my kitchen counter, my only company the hum of the refrigerator. Dating? Forget it. I didn't have the time, the money, or the emotional energy. The few guys I went out with quickly lost interest when they realized I was too focused on work to play the part of a carefree girlfriend. One even said, "You're kind of intense." Like, do you ever relax? Intense. That word haunted me, but I told myself I'd rather be intense than invisible. 2 years into the grind, I got an opportunity. My boss asked me to pitch an idea to a client when the rest of the team was too busy. I stayed up all night preparing. I poured my soul into that presentation, rehearsing in my mirror until my voice went hoarse. The next day, I stood in front of the client, palms sweating, heart racing, and delivered it like my life depended on it. Because in a way, it did. When I finished, the client smiled. That's exactly what we've been looking for. That project brought in more money than the company had seen in months. And for the first time, my boss looked at me not as the girl who fetched coffee, but as someone with value. They gave me more responsibility, bigger projects. I worked weekends, skipped holidays, and said yes to everything. It wasn't easy, but slowly, I began to climb. One Friday evening, after a long week, I stopped by a coffee shop on my way home. I was exhausted, wearing my worn-out heels and carrying a laptop bag that felt like it weighed more than me. And that's when I saw her, Rebecca. She was sitting by the window with a friend, sipping a latte, wearing a blazer that probably cost more than my monthly rent. She spotted me, her eyes widening in surprise, and then she smiled that same condescending smile I remembered. "Well, look at you," she said, standing up and giving me a quick hug. "I didn't know you were still in the city." "Where are you working these days?" I told her. Her eyebrows lifted just slightly as if to say, "Oh, small company, huh?" Then she started talking about herself, about how she was working for a big firm, traveling, living in a downtown loft. She slipped in the name of her designer handbag like it was part of the story. I smiled, nodded, and listened. But inside, that old fire reignited. When she finally said, "We should catch up sometime," I knew she didn't mean it. She never did. As I walked out of that coffee shop, I whispered to myself, "Just wait. You'll see me again. But it won't be as the girl you used to pity." But success is never a straight line. A year later, the company downsized. I lost my job overnight. Just like that, all the progress I'd clawed my way toward was gone. I tried to stay positive, but weeks turned into months. I sent out resumes, went on interviews, heard, "We'll call you," more times than I could count. My savings drained. I fell behind on rent. I ate canned soup for dinner 3 nights in a row. One evening, I found myself standing in front of a boutique downtown. Not the same one as back home, but similar. Dresses in the window. Beautiful, elegant, expensive. I stood there with tears streaming down my face, thinking, maybe they were right. Maybe I was never meant to have this kind of life. But then I remembered my mother's voice. Don't let anybody make you feel small. The next morning, I got up, brushed my hair, and forced myself to keep applying. Finally, after months of rejection, I landed a position at a growing startup. It wasn't glamorous. The office was basically a converted warehouse, and the pay was less than I wanted. But there was energy there, possibility. I threw myself into it. I stayed late, learned everything I could, took risks nobody else wanted to take. My ideas weren't just heard, they were valued. And little by little, my career began to rise again. This time, though, I wasn't just working for a paycheck. I was building something for myself. I started a side hustle, freelancing on weekends, using my marketing skills to help small businesses. At first, it was just extra cash. But soon, word spread. Clients came to me, not the other way around. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was thriving. It was around this time that I met Daniel. He was charming, funny, the kind of man who looked at me like I wasn't the poor girl from Ohio anymore. For the first time, I let myself believe I could have both, a career and love. But love, as I learned, can be its own kind of betrayal. Daniel liked the ambitious version of me, but not the hard-working reality. He liked the confidence, but not the late nights. He liked the dream, but not the grind. One night, after I came home late from a meeting, he said, "I don't know if I can do this. You're always working. When is it going to be about us?" I wanted to scream. Us? Did he not see that every late night, every sacrifice was for the life we could build together? But he didn't get it. And eventually, he left. The old me would have broken, but this time, I didn't. I poured the heartbreak into my work, into myself, because I knew I couldn't afford to fall apart. Years passed. Slowly, I built a reputation. My side hustle grew into a business of its own. I left the startup and focused on my clients full-time. And then one day, I realized I wasn't chasing stability anymore. I had it. I wasn't trying to prove I could survive. I had proven it. But the fire inside me wasn't gone, because the memory of that laughter, the laughter outside that boutique window, still echoed. And I knew. The time for my silent revenge was coming. I used to think revenge would be loud, a fight, an argument, a chance to throw every insult back in their faces. But when the moment finally came, I realized something. The sweetest revenge doesn't need words. Sometimes, silence says it all. By the time I turned 30, I was running my own small marketing agency. What started as freelancing from my kitchen table had grown into an office with a team of 5. We weren't the biggest company in the city, but we were known. We were respected. And me? I was no longer the girl who counted coins at the grocery store. I had savings, investments, a place I could call my own. One Saturday, as I was unpacking boxes in my new condo, I came across the old jar I used to keep under my bed. The one filled with diner tips and crumpled bills from late nights waiting tables. I opened it, and even though the money inside was practically worthless now, I cried. Because it wasn't just a jar. It was proof. Proof that I had built this life from nothing. That night, I took myself out to dinner at a nice restaurant. Alone. Not because I didn't have anyone to go with, but because I finally didn't need anyone to validate me. For the first time in years, I felt free. The past has a funny way of circling back. A few weeks later, I got a Facebook message from Laura. Yes, that Laura. One of the girls who had laughed outside the boutique window years ago. She was organizing our high school reunion. "It would be so great if you came," she wrote, adding smiley emojis as if we'd been best friends all along. At first, I laughed. Why would I go back? Why reopen old wounds? But then, something inside me shifted. This wasn't about them anymore. It was about me, about facing the ghosts of my past and proving, to myself most of all, that I was no longer that girl who stood outside looking in. So I RSVP'd yes. The week of the reunion, I walked into a boutique. Not the same one from high school. It had long since closed, but one just like it. Polished floors, soft lighting, racks of clothing that whispered elegance. And there it was. Not the exact midnight blue dress I'd seen as a teenager, but close. A gown in deep sapphire silk, with lace detailing so delicate it looked like it belonged in a dream. I ran my fingers over the fabric, my heart racing. I could buy it. Right now. No hesitation. No guilt. So I did. When I walked out of that store with the dress and a garment bag over my shoulder, I felt like I had finally kept the promise I made to myself all those years ago. The night of the reunion, I slipped into the dress. I curled my hair, put on the heels I'd saved for special occasions, and looked in the mirror. For a moment, I didn't recognize myself. Not because I looked different, but because I finally saw myself the way I was meant to be seen. Strong, capable, worthy. When I walked into the banquet hall, heads turned, conversations paused. For a second, I felt that old insecurity rising. Do I belong here? But then I remembered. I hadn't come to fit in. I had come to stand tall. Rebecca spotted me first. Her smile faltered for just a moment before she put on that familiar mask of confidence. Tiffany followed, her eyes flicking up and down the length of my dress. And Laura just blinked like she was seeing a ghost. Wow, Rebecca said finally, her voice just a little too high. You look amazing, I smiled. Thank you. And that was all. I didn't brag about my business. I didn't list my accomplishments. I didn't throw their old words back at them. I just smiled, moved past them, and let the silence hang heavy in the air. Because in that moment, they knew. They remembered the boutique window, the laughter, the way they dismissed me. And they saw the proof, standing in front of them in sapphire silk. I stayed at the reunion for an hour, catching up with people who actually mattered. Old teachers, classmates who had been kind, faces I hadn't seen in years. And then, when I felt the night had given me what I needed, I left. Driving home, I thought about that girl who once stood outside the boutique window, staring at a dress she could never afford. I wanted to reach back through time, hold her by the shoulders and tell her, don't give up. One day, they'll see you. One day, you'll see yourself. Because the truth is, the revenge wasn't the dress. It wasn't walking past them at the reunion. The real revenge was that I had built a life they could never take away from me. And the real lesson? Never let someone else's laughter define you. Let it fuel you. Let it push you. And one day, when you walk into the room they never thought you belonged in, you won't need to say a word. They laughed at me for staring too long at a dress in a boutique window. Years later, I walked past them wearing it, and that was enough.